Hey guys, Gruz here, and today I'm talking about games for the earliest of Macintosh computers. These are games that are compatible with the original Macintosh, aka the Mac 128K. And I'm talking a stock 128K. These games are small enough to fit on a single 400K floppy, along with the system folder, so you can just pop the disk in and go. I've actually put together an archive for today's video that you can find in the description. It'll have all the games I show you today on bootable 400K Macintosh file system floppies for use on the 128K variant of Mini VMac, or you can even put them on real floppies. First up, this is a game called Aliens, a very early Mac game released in 1985 by the Environmental Software Company. It's a pretty decent Galaxian clone for being released on the Mac in 1985. This is a time when developers still really hadn't figured out the ins and outs of the Mac, so a lot of games were really rough around the edges, and a lot of times they didn't have animation. Overall, this is a simple game. You control the ship at the bottom of the screen with the mouse, and you've got to shoot all the bad guys at the top of the screen. Once you blast all of them, you do it all over again and try to get a high score. I really like how the enemies behave in this game. They move around the screen in a very arcade-like way. They're pretty fast moving too, which makes up most of the difficulty. You can only put 2 shots on the screen at a time, so it forces you to get into the action towards the center of the screen if you want to shoot the bad guys. The only copy I've found of this game online is kind of incomplete. Sometimes the sound effects don't work, and it's missing the instructions. The name of this game is actually an acronym, but of what? Without those instructions, your guess is as good as mine. If anyone out there has a better copy of this, let me know. Next up, this is a side-scrolling shooter called Mac Landing. It's a clone of the arcade game Defender, but this one has been designed to be compatible with the earliest of Macs. In this game, you've got to defeat waves of incoming aliens, shooting them down before they grab your astronauts. If they do grab your astronauts, they'll try to fly off with them. At which point, you can still shoot the aliens to rescue your guys, but you've got to be careful not to shoot your own guys. A really cool thing about this game is that it's got the radar at the top of the screen just like the arcade. It is pretty faithful to the arcade original, minus some bad guys. The worst part about this one though are the controls. First, you've got tab to go up, shift to go down, command to change direction, apostrophe to fire your thrusters, and return to shoot your lasers. I don't know how the developer came to the conclusion that this is how it should be, but wow. It's like playing a game of Twister with your fingers. Bad controls aside, this is a solid game, and I definitely recommend it for the earliest of Macs. Frogger was everywhere back in the 80s. You'd be hard-pressed to find a platform that did not have some sort of official Frogger port, and the Mac was no different. This version was developed specifically for the original Mac 128K and has trouble with newer Macs. The PC version was also kind of like that, where it was developed for the IBM 5150 and had trouble with newer machines. The trouble here with the Mac version is that it won't run on the Mac Plus or newer. Eventually it was discovered that you can hack the game files to get it to run, but you have to specify exactly how much RAM your computer has. So if your Mac has 2 megabytes, you'd specify that, and it would only work on a Mac with 2 megabytes of RAM. The gameplay here is exactly what you'd expect. You've got to get your frogs across the road and over the logs to safety on the other side. This game tries to use the mouse as a game controller, but it's a big fail. You move the mouse, which makes an arrow at the bottom of the screen point in that direction. Then you click the mouse button to jump in that direction. It's awful. Thankfully, it also uses keyboard controls, which it does allow you to set custom controls, but it changes back to the default every time you start up the game. You'll also have to make sure to hit the caps lock because it expects capital letters only. It was a huge pain in the butt to play this on anything but the original Macs, but if you are, it's a pretty decent port that runs just fine, and I recommend it. Next, this is Crystal Raider, an early version of the popular Mac game Crystal Quest. So this was the first in the series, where the original version was released as shareware, and all the versions that came after it were proper commercial releases. In this game, you control your ship with the mouse and try to navigate around the screen and pick up all the crystals. Then you've got to get your ship through the exit at the bottom of the screen. There'll be enemies that try to get you, but you can shoot down by clicking the mouse. The shooting is momentum based, so your bullet will fly at the same speed you're moving when you let the shot off. It takes a little practice to get this one down. This game differs from the later commercial titles in that the movement is not as refined in this one. It's tough to move the ship around accurately. It's very speedy and very sensitive. Another difference here is that it has no digitized sound effects like Crystal Quest does. Most games that will run on the 128K use a sound driver square wave synthesizer for sound effects, as it was the least CPU heavy way to do sound on the Mac. And digitized sound effects don't play well with the low system memory and disk space. Personally, I like the way this game does sound effects, and I think they sound great. This is a fun game that I definitely recommend for the 128K. The last game I've got for you today is a very interesting arcade-style game called Airborne. This was a pretty popular game back in the day. It was created by the guys behind the Dark Castle series on Mac. In this game, you move the mouse to control an anti-aircraft gun and try to take out all the incoming helicopters, planes, and jets. The enemies will also drop paratroopers out of the ships, which you'll want to try and shoot out of the air, as if too many of them hit the ground, they'll start rushing you and try to blow up your base. You have two different guns, the anti-aircraft gun and a mortar, which you can toggle between the two using the spacebar. Most of the time you'll use the anti-aircraft gun, but the mortar is the only way to hit the guys who have made it to the ground. There's also a jet that shows up every so often, who will swoop through the screen and shoot a missile at you. If you're quick enough, you can shoot the jet and even the missile for big points, which is ultimately what you're after in this game. One of the big selling points of this game was that it used a technique called real sound, which delivered digitized audio to the Mac. At the time this game was released, it was not common. It's difficult to pinpoint the first game that used digitized audio, but this was certainly one of the first. This one works on most all compact Macs, with the biggest difference in running it on the 128K was that the opening song Flight of the Valkyries was a little bit shorter. This is such a fun game, a classic for the Mac that I highly recommend. And there we have it. These are my game recommendations for the original Macintosh, aka the 128K. If you want to check any of these games out, you can find a link in the description to the disc images that I put together. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like on it to let me know. I actually came up with a lot more game recommendations for the 128K, so let me know if you want another video on this topic in the future. And if you've got any recommendations for games compatible with the 128K, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Thanks for your time today, guys. Take care.